All right, let's jump into our next hot topic. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a massive cut to Canada's immigration targets today. The number of permanent residents will be reduced by at least 20%. A poll earlier this month found 58% of Canadians surveyed thought there was too much immigration into the country. So, do you agree with this move? Mel, I'm going to throw this hot potato at you first, girl.
This is a big one. This is a big one. Okay, so, you know, we know what happened during the pandemic. We actually needed people to be coming into this country to help. We had a lot of gaps in healthcare. We all remember that. There were a lot of jobs, and I think immigration got ramped up. We also talked about on this show that Canadians, guess what? We're living longer, but a lot of us are retiring. A lot of us are not having kids. And so when you look at our population, we're actually not even replacing ourselves. So how do you fill gaps in jobs that are needed for this economy to run well? You have to fill that gap with immigration. The question is, how much is too much? It's the Goldilocks that you like to say, right? There's too little, there's too much, and how do you figure it out? Sometimes it's this way. So we know that there is a scarcity of resources. We know how expensive housing is. We know how expensive it is to try to find a car. I mean, you do the list. So are they tweaking? Yes. Do we, in the end, however, long-term need immigration? Yes. And here's my fear, because it always happens when you start to hear this question of we need to reduce immigration. It usually, for some people, goes hand in hand with racism. And that's the part that makes me feel very disturbed. You can say we can slow down immigration and not turn into a racist about it, okay? So the idea of xenophobia, being fearful. And I just kind of remember, my parents were immigrants. This country is great because of immigrants like my parents. So is there a Goldilocks? Yes. Do we need to make changes? Yes. Do I think that this is forever? No, we need immigration.
Yeah, and Riley, I know you're charged up about this.
Yeah, yes.
So how do you feel about it?
Listen, okay, when I first saw this, I reminded me of this tweet from 2019 that Justin Trudeau, that at the time I think was the most liked tweet by any prime minister of all time. And it says, you know, here we go. To those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canada will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Welcome to Canada. And I'm just like, the irony that it feels in this moment is like just so high. I think a thing that's very frustrating about conversations of immigration is that they often get spun in such a way, specifically by more conservative parties, and I think that's what the Liberals are really bowing to in this moment, is this sentiment that immigration is what should be directly tied to housing crises, affordability crises. No, we're in a housing crisis because we have decades of terrible housing policy. Like, no, there's very few provinces in this country that have rent control. Of course, that's going to make things expensive.
Speak on it, Riley.
Stephen Harper could have built houses in 2007, and then we wouldn't be doing this now. But it's a real easy thing for politicians to say, no, that's not my fault. That's not my party's fault. This is this amorphous, brown, imagined black blob in people's heads. Because once again, it's not white immigrants that they're thinking about often. It's black and brown immigrants. And if you listen to the sentiment online, that is who a lot of this anti-racist, xenophobic racism is directed to, is black and brown people, Asian people. And I think that it is just a classic playbook of politicians in order to scapegoat a demographic on what is ultimately their policy failures.
Here, Riley, here.
I was sitting back and reflecting, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Like, my grandfather came here, you know, back at the turn of the century, basically, family, Italian immigrants, and they managed to go, again, to industries where, like, there were mines, there were, like, whatever, in northern Ontario, and on very small wages, were able to acquire housing. And in this day and age, that is an impossible scenario. So you do have to ask the question as to why. What policies aren't in place, or is part of this story also the greed of capitalism, that these developers aren't being held to account? Is part of it that wages have gone up? I don't know what the whole equation is, but something doesn't completely add up. I will say one surprising thing with this research, when I was looking into today, is that recent immigrants are also the ones who are thinking immigration levels are too high. In fact, in this one poll, 42% of more than 2,000 adults who had immigrated to Canada in the last decade were saying that the Liberals' immigration targets were too permissive.
Yeah,
that I found
I know.
Interesting.
I found that same research and I was blown away. I'm like, the very people who benefited off the system are now going, no, we don't want you coming in. But you're not the immigrants that we want coming into this country, which is mind-blowing. And in my deep dive, first of all, you know, there's a real anti-immigration sentiment that's happening in North America, period. In the US and in Canada. In the US, it's a different issue.
Europe too.
And and in Europe as well. And I know that Trudeau made this change because he's bowing down to this overwhelming criticism that there are too many people coming to this country, plus the opposition is also breathing down his neck about the situation. But in my research, I found in 2019, Canada was still considered a very welcoming place to move to, right? And then the federal government made an announcement that they were going to welcome 1 million permanent residents, to 485,000 in 2024 and 500,000 by 2025, 2026. And I think and this article also thought it was the number, just hearing 1 million people is with the knee-jerk reaction where everybody's like, whoa, 1 million people? That's way too much. And all of a sudden they started attributing it to like, we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough jobs. And I think it is the true number, and that is what people are really reacting to, because for the first time since 1977, the attitude towards Canada being a welcoming place has changed. And I think it has directly to do with people hearing those hard numbers and not liking it.
And I really think it's very important that we talk about this and nip it in the bud now, because it's going to get worse. Like the reason why also, and this is where Canada is so good, it has such good PR of this idea of like, we are a nice, welcoming, do no wrong country. I'm like, you send arms to regions that make things unstable such that they have to immigrate here. We produce oil that makes the world hotter and their countries get flooded, so they have to come here. Like this idea that Canada isn't like, doesn't owe people.
Responsible.
Yeah, exactly. Is I think a real farce, and that Canada and politicians do a really good job of pretending like we are somehow more noble than somewhere like the States or more noble than somewhere like Germany, when in fact, like, we are really not.
Quick question, would you run for Prime Minister, please? I'm listening to you going, Riley, what do you need? What do you need? Oh my gosh.
Wow.
You're like, no.
She's like, I'm going to leave that one right there, everybody. Great discussion. I hope it does spur discussion in households that are watching this for sure.
Hey, you, come a bit closer. We've got so many more must-see interviews, spicy debates, lifestyle tips, and pop culture moments. So subscribe to our channel by tapping the logo below and don't miss out.